Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our fourth and last public lecture of our March series, exploring the role of Japan as a regional security actor. Today, we will be looking at Japan's very special relationship with India. India that has somehow emerged as a regional security player with a fully fledged foreign and security policy in the last couple of years, and the famous Japan-India relationship, which to me really is one of the most novel and most defining features of the Indo-Pacific strategic landscape. Now, I'm extremely honored to be in the best possible company of Dr. Jagannath Panda, a research fellow at the Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis. Jagannath is also the coordinator of the Institute's East Asia Center, and in that capacity, he actually manages all the regular 1.5 and official dialogues with the East Asia's preferred partners, so China, Japan, Korea. I believe that you're the best positioned person actually to tell us more about India's eastward shift or look east policy as well. Welcome, thank you very much for joining us, Jagannath. As a second speaker on the Japanese side, I will have the pleasure to welcome Dr. Satoru Nagao, a non-resident fellow at the Hudson Institute, Washington-based. Among other, Satoru-san is also holding various teaching positions at various Japanese universities. I won't be going through that. And as far as I know, Dr. Nagao is one of the Japanese scholars that has been focusing on India way before it was in fashion. In fact, we met in 2012. I believe we were both finishing our PhDs. This was in Tokyo. And you were already looking at India. So you're one of the, at least to me, you're one of the longest, one of the people that really pioneered this relationship way before we started talking about it. So we will have an hour and a half. I will give 30 minutes each so that we have a crossed view on the topic. And before we start, I will just remind our audience that, of course, they cannot be seen or see others, but they are more than welcome to post their questions in the Q&A section on the bottom right of your screen. So without further ado, Dr. Panda, the floor is yours. Please enlighten us on the state of, well, at least from the Indian perspective, on what is the view, why Japan is so important, why do we need to partner with Japan, and what really drives this very interesting relationship ahead. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Let me at the outset thank Dr. Eva Pajisopa for this kind invitation. I also thank Dr. Céline Pajon and CSDS in Brussels for this kind invitations and arrangement for this discussion today on India-Japan relations. And also it's a excellent opportunity to share this platform with my good friend, Dr. Satoru Nagao-san. With whom I enjoy a good chemistry, and we always differ on India-China and India-Japan relations, but that's for good academic part. And it's a pleasure to be here, and hello everyone in Brussels and elsewhere in the world. Now, what I'm going to do in the next 25 to 30 minutes is going to share my personal perception of this relationship. Our chair, Dr. Pajisopa, pointed out that this is a special relationship, and actually there are a lot of significant ingredients in this relationship, which actually talks the volume of these partnerships. And this partnership has been one of the statement partnership in Indo-Pacific politics today. So in order to discuss it in details, where does this relationship stands today? Where does it promises to move from now on? And what are the problematic aspects in India-Japan today? Let me structure my point of view into 5 specific questions. And each one of these 5 questions, I'm going to divide in 5 minutes to explain my view, and then we can have a discussion. My first fundamental point here to discuss with all of you is where does this India-Japan partnership today really stands? I mean, this is definitely a special partnership. And if we see in a forward-looking spirit, I think 2022 will be the year when both India and Japan would be actually celebrating the 70th anniversary of diplomatic ties. And that actually explains the maturity of these partnerships. And today, if we talk about this relationship, it is a peaceful relationship. And there are no per se historical discords or disputes where we could say that there are actually gray areas to address. Fundamentally, there are no security gray areas where we could say that India Japan needs to address these aspects in order to improve their relationship. What this relationship today promises is to move ahead and to imbibe a global character. And to that effect, there are a number of gray areas what has not really been covered in India-Japan relationship. And I think that is the hallmark of this relationship. It promises about the future. It promises about the politics in the regions which are much more complex and much more difficult to explain and narrate. So to that effect, I think India-Japan relationship is in very good order. And today, probably if we talk about the Asian politics and Indo-Pacific politics, then this relationship is definitely one of the talking relationship in regional and global politics. But I think what has been the outstanding element of India-Japan partnership is the confidence they have gathered all this while. And if you could move my slides a little upward, you would see that I'm talking about three kinds of synergy. One is the political synergy, a little below. One is the political synergy that has been established between India and Japan. If you could move it a little up. Yes, it's in the first slide, in the first page. It's the political synergy between India and Japan. If we see the last 1 decade or so, I think the leadership summit between the two countries has been the outstanding element of this partnership. And today what we see, it's not only the annual leadership summit, we have 2+2 dialogue mechanisms, we have annual foreign ministers level dialogue mechanisms, we have NSA level dialogue mechanisms, and then we have different levels of official dialogue mechanisms. And that has been one of the outstanding element of this partnership. And today one can say that not only there is a level of confidence, but there is a political synergy exists in India-Japan relationship, and that actually explains the volume of this partnership. The second is the sectoral synergy. And I think if we talk about the sectoral synergy, we actually try to get an impression of a chemistry of economics and socio-economic issues being addressed at the bilateral and at the regional level. And this has been one of the defining aspect of India-Japan relationship, because Japan for last few years, and if we not really go back to the last 2 decades, if we just take into account the last 1 decade's example, I think in last 1 decade, Japan's foreign policy has been very proactive. And there we saw the former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe introducing a lot of regional and global initiatives. And one of the key global initiatives was expanded partnership of quality infrastructure, which was earlier introduced in 2015 as PQI, Partnership for Quality Infrastructure. That was one of those glaring example of Japan's looking at the regions in a new context and trying to search many countries, including India, as a key regional partner. And to that effect, India also welcomed this initiative in such a way that what we saw gradually is that India, in its Act East policy, trying to find a good socio-economic synergy, trying to match it with Abe's EPQI initiatives. And today what we see is that it's not only at the at the regional level, there is a good understanding which is emerging on the foreign policy front, particularly trying to combine the EPQI with the Arctic policy. But there is a domestic constituency which has actually talking about India-Japan partnerships. And within India, there is a welcome context of any Japanese initiatives coming to India is being seen positively. And today we see that there is a state-to-state connections exist between India and Japan. This is a very much provincial level engagement happening between the two countries. There are city-to-city linkages. There are areas of new areas of cooperation is first emerging, science and technology to health to 5G technology. So one can say that this synergy is also extending to different sectors, be it on the economic front, on the investment, on the infrastructure, on the connectivity issues, but also on the socio-economic front. And I think that also talks about the evolving confidence in India-Japan ties, which is actually been one of the outstanding relationship of Asian politics today. The third synergy is the Indo-Pacific Synergy, which has been in some way the most defining element of the Indo-Pacific and the global politics today. And if you see the Indo-Pacific Synergy, and I think in many ways, much of this credit goes to former Prime Minister Abe to talk about not only the Indo-Pacific, taking forward the Indo-Pacific slogan, but also to talk about revitalizing the Quad process. In fact, he was the one who actually delivered the Quad proposition in Indian Parliament for the first time in 2007, even though there was a talk about the quadrilateral forums in 2003 and 4 on the sideline of the tsunami, but it was much credit goes to Prime Minister Abe, who actually talked about this quadrilateral initiative. And in 2017, eventually it happened at the ministerial level. And today we are having a leadership level summit among the Quad countries. But what is actually significant here is that how India and Japan are actually trying to complement not only the Quad process, but also the trilateral that is there with Australia and with the United States of America. And if you see the Quad Leadership Summit joint statement, it's talking about free, open, inclusive, and resilient Indo-Pacific. Earlier, I think both the countries were talking about free, open, and inclusive Indo-Pacific. India is the only country which has been talking about inclusive Indo-Pacific from the beginning. Japan also supported to this narrative gradually. But today, I think there is a new element which has been added, resilient Indo-Pacific, and that is actually a lot of credit goes to Japan because Prime Minister Abe constantly talking about quality infrastructure and resilience, transparent infrastructure and connectivity initiatives. So to that effect, I think India-Japan relationship is in good order, but it has a future to observe, and I think we need to look forward from here. But then we also need to discuss what is actually missing in India-Japan ties today. And there I do become very critical on India-Japan relationship, because there are a lot of promise, there are a lot of prospects, but again, the relationship to me as a scholar is moving very slowly. And even though today we have all the optimist context to draw inferences to suggest that this relationship has evolved well to a great deal, and it has become one of the defining element of Indo-Pacific power politics today. But I think there are still very much a lot of gray areas which needs to be addressed. And to me, I think there has been a vacuum after the Prime Minister Abe's resignation, and that needs to be addressed. And this vacuum is mostly about the personal chemistry among the two leaders, Prime Minister Abe and Prime Minister Modi. That was actually established over the last few years, even though there are views which suggest that Prime Minister Abe did enjoy a good chemistry with the previous Indian leadership. And I do also agree with that point of view. But I think Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Abe did share a special chemistry, and their special chemistry actually in some ways defined the Indo-Pacific context. Today, we don't really see that chemistry, at least not to me, being visible outrightly after Abe's resignation. And I think that is one of those gray area which we need to improve. And that is the missing personal link between India and Japan today. But more than that, I think there are two specific issues India and Japan needs to discuss about if they need to really take this relationship forward. One is, I think, as the chair, Dr. Pejoba pointed out rightly, that it's a special relationship. And it's a relationship that promises to be a global partnership. But again, if we try to see it skeptically, we don't have enough cross-continental connect or cross-continental cooperative projects between India and Japan. We have discussed a lot to take forward, the Asia's cooperations with Africa, Asia's cooperation with Europe, Asia's cooperations, India and Japan's cooperations with the Middle East. But actually, India and Japan have not really taken it forward. So we need to contextualize India-Japan partnership in a cross-continental connect context, and I think we need to talk about cooperations with other countries in the regions. And therefore, I think one of the arguments that I have been making for a long time is that one of the gray areas, in fact, one of the real drawback of India-Japan ties is that it has all the character of Indo-Pacific, Indo-Pacific features today. Indo-Pacific politics are being addressed in India-Japan ties, and it has become a solidified partnership. But then today, we don't really see this partnership really complementing to the Eurasian politics. And we don't really see India and Japan really talking about Eurasian politics. There are regions like Central Asia, there are regions like Middle East, a greater part of the Middle East regions, which are not really being talked about between India and Japan, how to cooperate and how to take forward. And to that effect, I think with one country that both India and Japan needs to really talk about, actually talking about, if not a comprehensive partnership, a partnership in a trilateral forums on specific sector, that is ROSA. ROSA is still an effective power in the Eurasian regions, and probably India and Japan can think about drawing a trilateral cooperation with ROSA. But more than ROSA, I think what we could talk about is that a kind of India-Japan synergy emerging with the select European countries. And to that effect, I think there are countries like France, there are countries like Germany, countries like Netherlands, countries probably like Belgium, and some of the Nordic countries like Sweden, Denmark, those who are actually taking strong anti-China positions. We could actually think about a country-specific cooperation in Europe, or maybe a trilateral, quadrilateral kind of a cooperations, both within the EU framework and outside the EU framework. The third question that I want to address in this context is that what is the status of the multilateral partnership between India and Japan today? Is it really a weak multilateral partnerships, even though we are seeing a lot happening on the Quad front, in the Indo-Pacific front, but the same kind of synergy is really missing in other contexts? And I think here we need to really talk about each and every multilateral forums and organizations in specific context of India-Japan cooperations. Of course, probably the structure of multilateral organization does not really allow two countries to immediately and in a direct format to cooperate every time. But I think there are organizations where both India and Japan can cooperate, and that should be discussed. For example, G20. G20 is one forum where India and Japan need to really, talk about more specific level of cooperations. G7 is another format. And I think there was a talk recently about expansion of the G7, but I think Japan has taken a backseat, and Japan has not really been forthcoming in terms of, supporting the expansion proposal of the G7. And I think India could, rightfully emerge as a expanded member of the G7 plus framework. And I think Japan should, think about that. G4 is another framework or multilateral framework where we could actually think about, how to actually revitalize the G4, or actually think about a more concentrated cooperative format between India and Japan, to talk and demand about United Nations Security Council reforms. And I think even though India and Japan are talking about reform of the UNSC for a long time, but the G4 strategy has not really been effective. It's not really been working. Of course, it's for a number of regions, including China's strong reservations. But we think we need to think to formulate a calculative and smart strategy in order to take it forward. Also, there are multilateral frameworks, new multilateral frameworks emerging, and I think India and Japan needs to really talk about that. For example, in the previous US administration, in the Trump administration, there was a talk about Blue Dot Networks initiatives between US, Japan, and Australia. India can be a partner of the Blue Dot Networks. Similarly, the Quad Plus format. Both India and Japan has been a strong supporter of the Quad proposition and the Indo-Pacific proposition. We need to actually talk about how to expand the Quad formulations, if not expand the current constituent members of the 4 countries, but at least invite new dialogue partners to be a part of the Quad process so that we can talk about the Quad Plus formulations. Similarly, we can talk about 5 propositions. Japan, even though not directly, there has been few discussions among the scholars, among the policy practitioners, that Japan is a prospective member, could be a prospective member for the 5 inclusion. Maybe if 5 proposition is getting expanded, Japan might be considered. So similarly, India could also rightfully be considered. And are India and Japan on a single page, on a right frame to talk about the expansion of 5 formulations, which is an intelligence sharing network? And I think these are the issues we need to really talk about, including the regional comprehensive economic partnership, where India did withdraw from the final negotiation of the RCEP. Japan supported India's inclusion, but again, I think there was a lack of synergy between India and Japan on the final concluding framework of the RCEP. So therefore, we need to really talk about a multilateral partnership which should be effective. My 4th point is that what are the potential defining areas of cooperation between India and Japan? And I think there we could, if you could move to the next slide, there you could see a number of issues are there where actually India and Japan can, cooperate with each other. And I think defense and security partnership is still an emerging area where both India and Japan are actually needs to work more seriously. Of course, we did sign the IDSA between India and Japan during the pandemic, and that has given a kind of a fillip to a more effective, serious security and defense, defense-oriented partnership between India and Japan. But I think there are a number of areas, be it defense manufacturing, be it co-production, be it purchasing and selling of weapons. I think these are the areas where India and Japan can improve their partnerships. Similarly, we can talk about the supply chain resilience initiatives. I think this is one of those emerging and critical area that we should be actually talking in details. And we saw just a week back, all the Quad countries talking about the supply chain resilience initiatives, and they have actually formed 3 groups. One is about climate change. The second one is about critical technologies and emerging technologies. The third is about more economic centric supply chain resilience initiatives, cooperative frameworks. And all of these 3 groups can be studied also in the bilateral context. Where does India-Japan relationship stand as far as these subgroups are concerned within the Quad framework? If we can talk about that, that would be really a promising aspect to talk about in India-Japan partnership. And I think one more critical aspect would be to talk about the economic multilateral frameworks or the free trading mechanisms. Of course, India is not a part of the RCEP, and India is not also aiming to be a part of the CPTPP, which is of a very high standard. But I think the way Japan is taking a leadership position in CPTPP, and the way Japan has actually now invited United Kingdom to be a member of the CPTPP, and the case of United Kingdom is being considered, there must be areas of synergy emerging for India to to cooperate on a multilateral trading frameworks, to cooperate with CPTPP. And to that effect, I think India and Japan needs to really have a more constructive dialogue. My last point would be the China challenge. Now there is a lot of talk about that. The China challenge has actually brought India and Japan together. Well, I don't really disagree with that proposition. Definitely, China challenge is a universal challenge, and today both India and Japan face a revisionist China, and Chinese activities, the maritime, incursions in the Senkaku Islands is a worrisome factor. The way China behaved towards India in the Galwan Valley incident and in the India-China boundary regions for last few years is a worrisome factor, and Japan has supported to India on those issues. So both India and Japan agree that the China challenge is ever growing for them. It is continuous for them, and there is a synergy emerging between India and Japan as far as China challenge is concerned. But what we need to do is that I think we need to talk about building this synergy, not only looking at the China challenge, but also how to balance out China's outreach across the regions, not only in the immediate Indo-Pacific regions, but also in the wider global frameworks, where India and Japan can talk about third country cooperation. And therefore, again, I would repeat that European countries could emerge, some of the European countries could emerge as real vital partners with India and Japan. Be it Netherlands, be it France and Germany, looking at the way France and Germany are actually showing inclination to observe the Indo-Pacific undercurrents, and the way Netherlands has issued official paper on Indo-Pacific, and the way there is a talk and synergy emerging among most of the mainstream European countries about Indo-Pacific politics, India and Japan could actually capitalize on this emerging politics. So therefore, I think we need to really talk about moving beyond the Indo-Pacific, talking about in a global framework. And I think to that effect, the China challenge not only must be seen in an immediate context, but in a global context. So I would conclude by saying that from the point of view of New Delhi, Japan is a priority and preferred partner for India in Asia and also in the world at large. For Japan also, India is becoming more important, but again, I think more reciprocation will be needed from Japan in order to factor India as a partner beyond the Indo-Pacific regions, and there both the countries needs to really work together to take it forward. I stop here and welcome your comments and questions whenever possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jagannath. I really appreciate the way that you actually didn't talk only about the China challenge. To be honest, I thought it was going to be one of the main hooks of the presentation. And one of my questions was precisely actually on the follow-up. You may be brought together by a common challenge, but what is there behind? And actually, that's the sort of thought that you already addressed. I'm also grateful for your for having paused at this multilateralism and the way we actually address the regional structure, because it's not all about the Quad. And here in Europe, we think extensively about how to engage with the region, with our partners, but also beyond. So while I pass the floor to Nagao Sensei, I would just like you to ponder on eventual possibility for trilateral cooperation with Europe. You really hinted upon the possibility a little bit. So if you could think deeper, that would be one of my follow-up questions, just a heads up. Okay, Nagao Sensei, what would be the view from Tokyo? I think we heard a rather extensive presentation from New Delhi. Is this really complementary? Because Jagannath actually left us there with the last question, saying, "Does Japan actually think the same?" So, does Japan think the same?
Yeah, that is very important question. Yeah, there is a perception gap. Yeah, that's true. Dr. Panda already explained comprehensive relation of the India and Japan. And I will explain China maybe. So this is maybe one of the hint of the perceptual gap. But that's true. So I will use the PowerPoint. So from now, I will share my PowerPoint. How? There is a limitation. Okay, can I share the data myself?
Normally we tested it and you should be able. So you just click on share screen and if you
this
cannot,
button. Okay.
did you see?
Yeah. Okay, I can do that.
Excellent.
Okay, so I will start my presentation. Thank you very much for giving a chance to explain what happened in Japan and India relation. Recently, the improved cooperation between Japan and India has become more evident. Japan and India have been increasing their diplomatic exchanges, joint exercises on armed forces, and seeking joint infrastructure projects. Especially age of Prime Minister Shinzo Abe and Prime Minister Modi, the relation is like that. So yes, Dr. Panda has already explained, but this picture tells everything, I believe. But deep Japan-India relations have not always naturally occurred because the geographical and geopolitical distance, unfortunately. For example, according to the Indian Ministry of External Affairs, 40,000 non-resident Indians live in Japan. Wow, 40,000 in this case. But Japan Ministry of Foreign Affairs pointed out that about 10,000 Japanese live in India. That was in 2018. However, 1,300,000 Indian and 440 Japanese living in the US. 240 Indian and 100,000 Japanese living in Australia. And 50,000 Indian and 120 Japanese live in China. Compare with these numbers, Japan and India have relatively few people-to-people exchanges, unfortunately. Therefore, it is logical to ask, why the relation of Japan and India have progressed recently? To answer this question, this presentation focusing on 3 questions. How have Japan-India relations developed? Why have the 2 countries done this? And what can Japan-India cooperation do? How have Japan-India relations developed? Japan and India hold high-level bilateral, trilateral, quadrilateral dialogues. Japan and India signed General Security of Military Information Agreement to share information in 2015, and Acquisition and Cross-Service Agreement to share supplies in 2020. Japan and India conduct joint exercises, Army and Army, the Dharma Guardian, the Navy to Navy, the GMX and Marabao, the Air Force and Air Force, the Shinyu Matsuri. And in 2018, India and Japan started joint development of unmanned ground vehicle to use in the India-China border. So Japan and India signed the civil nuclear agreement too in 2016. Wow. But despite there being some big projects, such as the Delhi-Mumbai Industrial Corridor, economic relations have not deepened enough on bilateral basis. For example, for India, Japan ranked 12th as a trading partner for India, only 2.2%. For Japan, India's trade share is only 1.2% of total trade. So if there is one more category with security and economy, value is the one. It is true that Japan and India share same value, such as democracy, human rights, so-called Western value. But at the same time, for Japan and India, security is more serious than value currently, unfortunately. And the value is more serious issue between Europe and China, because value indicates the influence of Western European system. If China will lead the world instead of Western countries, many countries will abandon Western value. So this is not a connecting issue between Japan and India so much. Important, but not number one priority. So feature of the Japan-India development is, first, until now, Japan-India security relations have developed faster than the economic relations and value relations. And second, Japan-India bilateral relations have developed alongside multilateral relations, including those with the US and Australia. And third, Japan-India relations have grown closer since the end of 2000, when China's activities began to grow and were perceived as a threat to both countries. Therefore, China is certainly a decisive factor in increasing Japan-India cooperation. Why have the two countries done this? Of course, China, but what has happened? For Japan, the main concerning point are China's activities in the sea around Japan. Of course, Beijing has begun to expand its military activities near Japan. For example, in 2004, Chinese nuclear attack submarine violated Japan's territorial sea in the East China Sea. China has also been carried out naval exercises on the Pacific side of Japan since 2008. The Chinese Air Force have also been expanding its activities. In 2030, Japan's Ministry of Defense white paper pointed out that in fiscal year 2012, the number of scrambles against Chinese aircraft exceeded the number of those against the Russian aircraft for the first time. In the fiscal year 2090, the number of scrambles against Chinese aircraft further increased to the 675 in 365 days. So why is China provoking us? What should we do? With regard to China's motivation, there is similarities between East China Sea and the Indo-China border area. Examining these similarities help to contextualize China's action and indicates neighbors like Japan and India should respond to the China's provocations. So I will explain one by one, three important similarities. And the first one, first similarity of note is China's repeated disregard for the international law when laying claim to new territories. In the East China Sea, China did not claim the Senkaku Island before the 1970s. China's attitude have since changed due to the potential existence of oil reserves in the East China Sea. And China is expressing the same attitude at the India-China border. In this case, Dr. Lobsang Sege, the president of the Tibetan Exile Administration, expressed that Dalai Lama consider the disputed territory of both Ladakh and Arunachal Pradesh to be part of India. Thus, there is a high possibility that China's claim to the area along the India-China border is legally baseless. Second recurring facet of the China's behavior is its exploitation of military power vacuum. For example, in the South China Sea, China occupied half of the Paracel Island just after France withdrew from Indochina in 1950s. In 1974, China expanded its presence to all of the Paracel Island after the US withdrew from South Vietnam. Additionally, China occupied 6 features of the Spratly Island after Soviet Union decreased its military presence in Vietnam in 1988. And again in 1995, China laid claim to Mischief Reef after US troops withdrew from Philippines. Like the South China Sea, in both East China Sea and the India-China border area, the military balance has changed recently, causing China to mistakenly infer that there is power vacuum. According to the SIPRI military expenditure database, published in April 2020, from 2010 to 2090, so one decade, China increased its military expenditure 85%. In comparison, Japan increased expenditure 2%, and India increased expenditure 37%. So Japan's defense in the East China Sea, or India's military defense along the India-China border are not weak. But the gap between the countries' defense budgets have widened in last decade. And along with the greater relative increase in military spending, China's military activities has also increased. This is the number of Chinese vessels identified within the contiguous zone in the water surrounding the Senkaku Island in Japan. This is the number of China's incursion in the India-China border. In 2011, China has made 230 incursions, but since 2011, the number of incursions have increased greatly, and in 2019, the number reached 663. This is overlap the two figures. When we compare two figures, we can find one similarities. So what happened in the East China Sea is what happened in the India-China border area. That is the reason India and Japan should cooperate. And third one, finally, China's arguably lawless expansionism is usually paired with the effort to exclude countries that are outside the region. In the East China Sea, China blames its assertive behavior on the intervention of outsiders. Similarly, in the case of India-China border, China is trying to halt Indian cooperation with the US, Japan, and Australia, which India's Prime Minister Modi has stepped up of late. So China believes the agreement amongst these four countries, India, Japan, US, Australia, so-called Quad, are the effort at containment and therefore want to stop them. To do so, which country would China choose to pressure? The most likely answer is India, because China and India share nearly 4,000 kilometer land border, unlike the US, Japan, and Australia, allowing China to liberate its army. Moreover, China perceives that it can more easily persuade India to leave the US-led security framework because India and the US are not formal allies. So much like its behavior in East China Sea, China is using military to pressure India to drop foreign partnership that might inhibit China. So China's lack of respect to the international law, expansion of the territorial claim where there are power vacuum, and effort to exclude outside actual formal regional intervention are common theme of China's exploiting the East China Sea, South China Sea also, and now India-China border. So question remains is how do countries affected by China's ambition like Japan and India respond? Knowing the pattern of China's behavior point towards the answer. We should do the opposite of what China wants. Firstly, countries around China must continue to respect the rule-based order grounded in current international law. Second, China's neighbor need to fill the military power vacuums by increasing their our defense budget and cooperate each other. And third, countries around China need to continue to enhance security cooperation with the US, Australia, and other like-minded countries, including European countries. And when Japan, India cooperate with the US, Australia, or like-minded countries, the partnership should promote not only regional security, but also economic cooperation. The strength of China's army depends on ample military budget. China's neighbor should avoid supporting China's economy by strengthening relations with US, Australia, and other like-minded countries, including European countries. So this is why. So what can Japan-India cooperation do? That is next theme. Do I have time? Okay. What effect Japan-India cooperation have on this kind of China's aggression? As mentioned above, for Japan and India, security is the most important issue. And if Japan and India and US and Australia cooperate with each other, there are at least 3 methods to maintain military balance. First, we should focus on linkage of the India-China border area and the East China Sea. For example, if India cooperates with Japan and the US, India will not need to deal with all the Chinese fighter jet and the missile at once, because China is likely to keep some of its fighter jet and missile in its east side against Japan and the US, and vice versa. And China's defense budget is also divided among its east front against Japan and the US and its southern front against India. Therefore, by using its know-how of high-end military infrastructure development, that's one of the methods. And second, if India has the will and capability, Japan and the US and Australia will be able to release themselves from the heavy burden of safeguard security in the Indian Ocean, and can deploy more military forces in the East China Sea and the South China Sea to maintain military balance. And thirdly, Japan and India can collaborate to support Southeast Asian countries around the South China Sea, which need to beef up their defense with a trustworthy partner that provide military support. So thus Japan and India should collaborate with each other and support these countries more effectively. Then in this case, interesting move related with long-range strike capability. For a long time, Japan and Australia have depended on US strike capability. Not India, Australia in this case, but depend on the US strike capability. That is a framework in this region. But for example, Japan possesses missile defense capability to intercept enemy's missile, but not the capability to strike missile launch pad of the enemy. However, now Japan and Australia and India have recently been seeking long-range strike capabilities. In this case, Japan, it decided to modify its current Izumo and Kaga helicopter carriers to be aircraft carrier with F-35 fighter jet. For this F-35 fighter jet, Japan is planning to possess 500 kilometer range, 900 kilometer range bomb and missiles. The domestic surface-to-surface missile also extends its range from current 200 kilometer to 900 kilometer or 1,500 kilometer or 2,000 kilometer range anti-missile. There are nearly 3,000 kilometers between the north and south edge of Japan and east and west edge of Japan. So given this distance, it is logical for Japan to possess 1,000 to 2,000 kilometer range missiles. But from the current 200 kilometer range missiles, the 1,000 to 2,000 kilometer range represents a new move for Japan. Indeed, in July 2020, Australia announced its intent to possess long-range strike capability. If Australia uses the latest new missile with F-35, Australia can deliver 2,000 kilometer range. And in the case of India, it has developed its strike capability very actively. Originally, India possessed nuclear weapons and had strike capability, but since the 2010s, India has developed more conventional strike capabilities. Since September 2020, India has tested many long-range missiles. This table shows what kind of long-range missiles India has tested. Therefore, along with the US, Japan and India and Australia are all planning to possess 1,000 to 2,000 kilometer long-range strike capabilities at the same time. So I want to ask, will it work? The offense-defense combination with long-range strike capability is more effective strategy than the defense-only strategy when those countries face China's territorial expansion. This territorial expansion tends to have a pattern. As I mentioned above, in South China Sea, when China has confidence in its military capability, it has expanded into disputed territory. Therefore, countries around China need to reduce China's overconfidence in military capability to deter its territorial expansion. One of the most effective methods is making China defend multiple fronts. If both Japan and India possess long-range strike capability, this combined capability makes China defend multiple fronts. Even if China decides to expand its territories along the India-China border, China still needs to expand a certain amount of its budget and military forces to defend itself against Japan. In addition, to deal with the route China is using to expand its territories, long-range strike capability is useful. If the straits or other choke points are under the range of US, Japan, India, Australia's strike capability, China cannot have the confidence to use these routes. In the case of the mountainous India-China border area, India can attack strategic bridges, tunnels, or airports anytime by using missiles. This reduces China's confidence in using this strategic infrastructure. And in this logic, dispatching aircraft carriers or nuclear submarines of United Kingdom and France or the German frigates to the Indo-Pacific are a welcome move for both Japan and India. So as mentioned above, Japan-India cooperation has three features. First, Japan-India security relations have developed faster than the economic relations. Or second, Japan-India bilateral relations have developed alongside multilateral relations, including with the US and Australia. And third, Japan-India relations have grown closer since the end of 2000, when China's activities began to grow and were perceived as a threat to India and Japan. As a result, this presentation focusing on China factor in Japan-India relations. And China has been escalating its assertive behavior against both Japan and India. Maintaining military balance is vital to curb China's activities. To do this, a new type of Quad-style security framework is establishing itself, one in which Japan-India cooperation play a vital part. So that is my presentation. And so this is maybe one of the Japan's perception. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nagao-san. It's a pleasure listening to you, and it's a pleasure to listening to this enthusiasm that Japan actually puts into the relationship. Thank you for obviously bringing the elephant in the room. It was very much as expected, and I think it combines very nicely the sort of pragmatic vision and approach that Jagannath gave us as well. I wish I had more time to ask my own questions. Unfortunately, I don't, because we are submerged by very, very good questions from the audience. So I'll go straight to those. There's actually quite a lot of them. So let me chunk it in sections by the ones that are most rated. Let me remind you, you can vote and upvote your questions. So I'll go through the most rated ones and the ones that came first. So on top of the one that I keep mine there, on top of the trilateral cooperation with Europe, of course, which you can keep somewhere in mind. Where does BRICS stand? That's a good one. We completely forgot about BRICS. We don't talk about BRICS, but they seem to be well alive and kicking from China's perspective. And that's one of the questions for India, especially. Where does BRICS stand? A second question on the India's focus on the Eurasian powers. It's true, Dr. Panda, that you did mention the focus on Eurasia quite prominently. Isn't there a danger that this kind of strategy would only escalate China's fears of formal encirclement by regional powers and inadvertently make Chinese behavior more belligerent? That's another question. And to keep it at 3, I will add a question from Mike, which was asked in the chat because she cannot post it online, and it's a very good one as well. What is the current status and the prospects for for India-Japan cooperation in the space domain? India and Japan are both rising space powers with impressive indigenous technology capacities, but it seems that Japan is focusing more on its cooperation with NASA, for instance, than with other regional powers. So can India and Japan eventually aspire to join forces in space? So I'll keep it at 3. Try to be brief because we have, well, take your time, but we have more questions to come. Jagannath, would you like to start?
Yeah, thank you, Eva, for those wonderful questions. And it was a pleasure to listen to Nagao-san also. Let me address as much as I can. And I think one question was about, anti-China. India, Japan cooperating with the European countries. Will it look like anti-China framework? See, we don't have to really worry about what China is really thinking. And I think we must draw the inferences. An example from Indo-Pacific, India-Japan cooperation in Indo-Pacific, the Quad process, and the way Indo-Pacific as a narrative has emerged, it has unnerved and disturbed China. So the Chinese will continue to create problems to India, to Japan, to many other countries in the regions. And there is no denial of such realities. So India, Japan trying to think about Europe something credible is definitely going to be disturbing the Chinese to some extent. But I think the Chinese foreign policy is very mature today, and Chinese foreign policy is also global in nature. It has evolved substantially. Today, China has a very substantial presence in Africa, in Latin America. And if we talk about specifically in Europe, and I think they have a 17-1 framework which actually binds together some of the Central European and Eastern European countries. So they have a significant presence throughout the Europe. They look at Europe in different set of regions. So India, Japan cooperating in Europe with third countries, it will definitely be a signal. But I think there are also positive aspects to look at it. How India and Japan can actually possibly cooperate with European countries in skill development, in issues like science and technology, in capacity development, in cyber technology, and space cooperations, issues like trade and economic investment. And I think these are areas, greater areas. We don't really need to think that what China would be thinking. These are areas which interests to every sovereign countries, every sovereign partnerships, every independent partnership, and we should be actually look exclusively in terms of promoting our partnerships with Europe. We should not be unduly worried about what China is thinking. The other thing was about, there was a question about the Mandala theory. Mandala theory, I think it was from Kamji Kaya in the chat box. And I think, see, let's be very clear. Mandala theory has its own limitations. It talks about a specific security-oriented power rivalry. It doesn't really talk about the power rivalry which is there per se in the international relations per se. So I think Mandala theory is very much enemy and neighborhood centric. It talks about your neighbor is your natural enemy, and the neighbor's friend is your natural friend. So that kind of thing actually the Mandala theory talks about. But I think if we try to promote India-Japan relationship, it has such a global and universal character. It doesn't have to engage every time in a China containment or China denial strategy. What we have to do is that we have to build a capacity on our own, taking forward the relationship ahead. And I think that should be the motto of India-Japan partnership. There was a question about BRICS, whether BRICS is still relevant or not. And I think this has to be seen in India-China context. What has happened between India and China on the boundaries over the last 1.5 years, and the way China actually behaved towards India in the Galwan Valley incident, killing Indian soldiers and engaging in a fight where there was a heavy casualty on the Chinese part. I think if we take into all of these things incidents into account, there is everything to believe that India won't be showing as much as interest possible towards the multilateral organizations with China, associating with China, like in BRICS, in AIIB, and in Shanghai Cooperation Organizations, where both India and China are members. But I think we have to see in a wider spectrum. And I think to that extent, India-China relationship is also has imbibed some sort of a global framework over the last 2 decades. And we should not be denying the reality of that relationship. So to that extent, I think even though there are tenseful moments between India and China, and even though China's behavior towards India has been very negative, I think there are multilateral mode of connections between India and China, and the trade and economic contacts between India and China has been the most stabilizing factor to cool down the tensions and to keep the relationship going. So to that effect, I think the BRICS will continue to stay here, even though the relevance of and the significance of BRICS might go down a little bit in India's priorities. But I don't think India would really go, in terms of withdrawing from BRICS. BRICS will exist because BRICS has a development bank. India has committed, and in fact, India has been one of the founder member of the new development bank of the BRICS. India has been one of the founder member of the AIIB. AIIB, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. So there are multilateral mode of trade and economic partnerships which exist independently between India and China. And that has been one of the defining element of India-China relationship. That has been most stabilizing factor. So to that effect, BRICS is going to continue. There was a question about, democracy is, how there is a question that the democracy is not really been seen in the same context the way it used to be seen in India, and Japan is today valuing more about values and democracy. Is there a mismatch, and how is this internal politics in both the countries are going to play out in India-Japan partnership? And I think what we have to keep it in mind is that democracy is never a barrier to partnerships, and particularly to build effective partnerships. And I think that's what the open societies are all about. If we talk about India and Japan, they have been continuously talking about free and open society in Indo-Pacific. And I think even though there are domestic politics which are there, which might give an impression that the freedom of communication, freedom of language, freedom of free speech, and communications are being checked. And but that's a part of the democratic politics. democracy always try to comes with new modes of politics. So we should not be really trying to confuse it with India-Japan partnership. India-Japan partnership has got enough to survive such kind of domestic politics. In fact, if we talk about India's domestic politics, in fact, Prime Minister Modi is the first Prime Minister who was given a kind of a green clean chit to Japan as an effective partner. So, and there is a Japan Plus initiative in Indian government today. And any Japanese companies trying to reach to India for investment, for business, they can directly reach to this department for project proposals clearance. And Japan is the only country which today has got the license to invest in all the 7, 8 northeastern states in India's northeastern regions. And therefore, it is a special partner for India. So the domestic politics is not really going to affect India-Japan partnership to a great extent. And I think if there are no other questions, then I'll stop here. If I'm forgetting, okay, there was one question about the space cooperations. If I can just very briefly address this. I think, yes, space cooperation is a new area where India and Japan can cooperate possibly, given their progressive trend in the partnerships that is happening from science and technology to, to security and defense area. But I think on these specific issues, there has to be more institutional dialogues between the scientific communities of India and Japan. Under Indian Council of Social Science Research, ICSSR, and in Japan, there are institutes which are actually engaged in talking about cooperations in a range of issues and range of areas, and space is very much being discussed there. So there is a great potential to talk about India-Japan cooperations, and I think India's space program is advancing in a much more prominent manner. And there, I think a great synergy is there that India enjoys with most of the Quad countries, be it with US, Australia, or Japan. So I think with specific reference to Japan, space is a new area which can be promoted. But again, a lot has to be discussed how India and Japan needs to cooperate on the space area. I'll stop here. Maybe I can, if I missed any questions, I can take it after some time.
Thank you very much, Jagannath. Yes, there are definitely much more questions, but we will move to that in the second round. I'll just like to give the space to Satoru-san as well. There is the question on space cooperation, same as to Jagannath, but to follow up a little bit on what Jagannath already started on the question of values and democracy. How does Japan actually view some of the criticisms that have been that we have heard recently towards India's perhaps some of the less democratic practices, and to kind of top it up for a Japanese perspective, how do you explain a relatively weak economic relations between Japan and India? Is that something to be done or remedy to in the future? So space, democracy, and economic cooperation.
Okay, about the space, space cooperation in the Quad is progressed. And last 2 weeks, we can find many articles about this, and that is a popular topic. But in this case, since 2007, when China tested anti-satellite missile, both Japan and India has changed. Before the 2007, two countries focusing on peaceful use of the space. But since 2007, we try to think the security is very important in the space area. And now the US focusing on the space, they established the Space Force. And to cooperate with the US, Japan also established some certain forces, not independent from the Air Force, but dedicated to the space area. And JAXA also focusing on the security issue. So that is the reason space cooperation is, of course, a mainly peaceful one, but background of this cooperation has a security-related one. So we'll progress, I believe. About the value. Indeed, ASEAN has many problems related with the value that, and this is Western culture. So that is the reason Asian people do not focusing on the values for a long time. But because of the US policy, Japan tried to catch up. Japan tried to adjust the US new policy. Indeed, the view from Japan, this US-China competition is very serious competition. One shall stand and one shall fall, we believe. Because if the United States has a history, but they believe only 244 years. If so, US needs only 169 years to change from just a colony of British Empire to the only one superpower in the world. And another 75 years, they have kept their status. So view from this situation, and during the process of this 169 years and 75 years, all of the rival has disappeared, including Japan. So we believe current China will disappear in the future. That is, and 2028, the view from the GDP, China exceeds the United States. China will exceed the United States in the GDP in 2080. So this year is 2021. We believe it will not happen. US will not concede such kind of status. That is the reason Japan tried to adjust the US policy as a US side, and we will be the winner this time. So value is important. But when US and Europe start to think the human rights situation in China is a problem, Japan try to catch up, and we are under process. That is the situation related to the value. And in this case, India is also a democratic country. That is the reason if India joined this move, Japan will say it will be welcome. Hong Kong, Xinjiang, along with this issue, maybe problem in Tibet will emerge, I think. That time, we ask India to cooperate, join us. But that is maybe answer of the value-related question. I forgot the third question. What is the third question? Maybe my memo has 7 or 8 questions, but you choose 3.
Yes, it was about the state, the relatively low level of economic cooperation between India and Japan.
Yeah, that's simply because our motivation came from security. Of course, but now the number of the Japanese companies opened office in India, more than 1,000. Despite this, economic relations as promoted very slow pace. Why? Because we do not know India. We need to know India first. But in this case, we should not forget one fact. Our factories in the Southeast Asia produce a product to sell the product in India. But in this case, the figures show this is economic relation between ASEAN and India. Indirectly, this product came from Japan. So indeed, economic cooperation between Japan and India is more bigger than the direct trade. Indirect trade is exists, I want to say. But so why? Because motivation is not so strong in the economically, but it will improve, I think.
Thank you. Well, definitely, yeah. I believe that that's something that the two countries can catch up on if the political will is there rather quickly. Okay, second round, Jagannath. Directly to you, how do you explain the failure of the Asia-Africa growth corridor coming from Céline Pajon, my partner in crime at the Japan program? And a follow-up question directly to you as well. You talked a lot about Eurasia, but South Asia region was not necessarily mentioned that much in your presentation. What are the prospects and what the two partners do together in South Asia? Is that you know, the priority area? We hear a lot about the Indian Ocean region lately, especially from the European perspective. And well, perhaps something to again ponder on. I don't know, it's a big question. Taiwan, since we're talking about the elephants in the room, and we did mention the problem of China. Where does Taiwan stand in your case, India's foreign policy?
No, these are very interesting questions, and thank you to Dr. Céline Pajon for that interesting questions about Asia-Africa Growth Corridor. I've written about this, and I have also addressed these questions earlier. I think what we need to really understand about Asia-Africa Growth Corridor was it was never officially launched or proposed as a initiatives. It was politically discussed. It was academically discussed, but it was never officially initiated. So I think there was a study group to talk about how the Asia-Africa Growth Corridor can be promoted. Prime Minister Modi actually talked about, and he announced about how India and Japan can cooperate with Africa and about Asia-Africa Growth Corridor in one of his speech in Mumbai. So there has been politically discussed about Asia-Africa Growth Corridor as a concept, but officially it was never initiated as an official launch project between India and Japan. There was study groups established among different think tanks to talk about how this initiative can be taken up. But saying that, giving this clarification, I would agree with you that it was certainly a failure. And a failure to the extent because it was a very ambitious initiative. In fact, if you see, I had prepared a map about Asia-Africa Growth Corridor, and it is widely referred among the strategic communities all across the world when they look at this Indo-Pacific regions and India-Japan cooperations. The proposition about Asia-Africa Growth Corridor was about trying to bring together almost 84 countries together. Let's say 50 to 53 African countries, then all of those ASEAN countries, some of the Indian Ocean countries, including with the lead of India and Japan, and trying to identify the gap between them. So it was collecting almost 83 to 84 countries, bringing together from Asian countries and the African countries, and looking maritime domain as a channel of communications. But I think that was one of the major drawback. Even though that is one of the aspects both India and Japan needs to work together in coming times to take forward their Indo-Pacific narratives, as well as to take forward their third country cooperations and other things they are planning. But I think that was an over-ambitious plan to talk only about the maritime communities, maritime countries which are critical to India and Japan, and not really talking about the countries which are land-based, maybe in the Middle East or some parts of Europe, which are actually critical and could be a bridge between India and Japan and Africa. So I think this corridor had a problematic aspect attached to it. The second thing is that I think it was the supply and the demand aspect of the East Africa Growth Corridor was not really gelling well, because Japan was a developed economy and Japan was willing to fund, but then the funding pattern was too big for Japan. We could not actually talk about the multilateral banks who could be associated to fund this mega project. I think there was a talk about, getting funding from African Union Bank, African Development Bank, but there were not many international banks we could talk about who could actually support these initiatives. So there was a flip side to about the project funding and funding this mega infrastructure. The third aspect was, I think it's the relationship pattern with China had done the damage. I think Japan was too careful to implement a project of such nature, not to give an impression that it is engaging with a China containment strategy. Similarly to India, India had to manage China on a number of issues. So I think India also never wanted to give an impression that it would be engaging in a counter narrative strategy of something of this nature, which will be engaged in some sort of counter narrative to Belt and Road Initiative of China. So I think the demand was there, but the supply side of how to actualize it, take it forward, it generate finance, and try to convince the associated countries to be a part of this narrative of this Asia-Africa growth initiative was a Herculean task. And I think to that effect, we can say that it did not really take up. But I think while saying that, whether it was a failure or not, I think both India and Japan today realizes that there is a need to take forward such kind of cooperation. And therefore, they are talking about more commercial oriented cooperations, business oriented cooperations. And if we see India-Japan official statement and their official cooperation dialogue, there is a mention about, business oriented groups, cooperations between India and Japan. And there is a group has been established. So they are talking about a business form of cooperations between Asia and Africa with the lead of India and Japan. Now, though we are yet to practically see in third country cooperations and a lot of projects India and Japan doing together in Africa, but I think at some stage, the way Indo-Pacific narrative is emerging and the chemistry between India and Japan has evolved over the years, they need to practically look at this aspect to actualize their third country cooperation, particularly in context of Africa, and going to Africa to cooperate in and carry out joint ventures cooperations frameworks there. The other question was about South Asia with reference to Sri Lanka, and that when I'm talking about Eurasia framework, why India-Japan partnership is not really succeeding in South Asia. I mean, again, we should not be over-ambitious. And I think we need to be realistic about India-Japan cooperations. And I think a lot is already happening. As I mentioned earlier, that India and Japan are cooperating in Northeast India and trying to translate all of these cooperations to Southeast Asia. So there is a example emerging there. And I think slowly that example is being reflected with one of the South Asian countries, for example, like Bangladesh. There are projects-based cooperations happening between India, Japan, and Bangladesh. Similarly, between India, Japan, and Sri Lanka. In Sri Lanka, there have been setback news recently, but I think some of these issues are being discussed, and a new momentum has already started between India and Japan to cooperate in South Asian regions. But again, I think there is a need of both official and political seriousness. Political seriousness was there with former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, and we don't really see the same kind of seriousness with the current political communities or political leaders in Japan at this moment. So for me, over the last few months has been a downside for India-Japan ties. We need to really take it forward. And to that effect, I think there needs to be a constructive dialogue between India and Japan political leaders and official leaders in specific context of South Asia. But this should not be seen in isolation. I think India-Japan relations in Eurasia can be co-developed and expanded in conjunction with South Asia. So I think we don't need to necessarily isolate each other or differentiate each other, both these regions from India-Japan relations. The other question was about Taiwan issue. And I think I have written one piece about, and in the course of next 1 month or so, in next few weeks probably, I'll be coming out with a piece on Taiwan. I think there is a virtual political understanding emerging between India, Japan, and Taiwan. There was a reluctance earlier, and this reluctance was partly for historical reasons. India had a political reservations, and India, like many other countries, India has actually holding a reservations about how to cooperate with Taiwan at the regional level, despite of Taiwan's new southern policy and despite of India's Act East policy. The relationship between India and Taiwan has not really been of high standard when it comes to the regional politics. So to that effect, a cooperation with Japan needs to be reframed, needs to be visualized, and needs to be also prioritized to some extent, that in what are the areas where India, Japan can possibly cooperate with Taiwan. For example, there are cooperations with regard to semiconductor, cooperations with regard to cyber security, cooperation with regard to infrastructure development, connectivity. All of these areas need a serious cooperative framework, where a trilateral framework among India, Japan, and Taiwan can emerge. Similarly, if we try to understand from Japan's point of view, given the historical legacy that Japan holds with regard to Taiwan, there was a gap in Japan-Taiwan ties. But I think that gap is, with the span of time and with the span of the politics that is emerging in Indo-Pacific, that kind of gap is getting resolved day by day. And what we are seeing today, Japan is making a progressive approach and progressive inclination to engage with Taiwan, and that needs to be welcomed. But at the same time, we need to be very vigilant about that Taiwan's expectations from India and Japan should not be overtly political. It should be economic. It should be restricted to the fact that we need to balance out China's outreach, but we should not really engage in a China containment strategy. That is neither in the interest of Japan nor in the interest of India, probably at this point when we are factoring Taiwan as a trilateral partner. There was one more question, if I can just answer it in 1 minute. I'm sorry, Eva, for this, because I forgot to attend one more question. There was a question about that Prime Minister Suga is using the word, the formulation, peaceful and prosperous Indo-Pacific rather than free and open Indo-Pacific. Is it really not really complementary to India and India-Japan ties? There was a question of this nature. So I think we don't need to see it in a distinct or a contradictory context. I think what Prime Minister
I'm afraid we lost Jagannath due to connection issues. So perhaps, Jagannath, can you hear us? Are you back?
Yes.
We lost you for a second. Okay, please finish.
Can I repeat the answer?
Yes, it was a connection problem. You suddenly got cut.
Okay, so if you can hear me, I'll just repeat that there was a question about peaceful and prosperous Indo-Pacific that Prime Minister Suga is using, and it is probably not very conducive to India because India and Japan are used to talk about free and open Indo-Pacific. I don't think it has to be seen in a contradictory context. And I think peaceful and prosperous Indo-Pacific is the same drawings that draws from the analogy of free and open Indo-Pacific. But we have to understand the context. I think the Japanese context is more about the maritime context, the maritime problem challenge it faced from China in the Senkaku Islands. So therefore, the political leadership in Japan are continuously using peaceful and prosperous Indo-Pacific, trying to give it a non-containment outlook, at the same time trying to pass a message that Japan is to uphold peace in the regions. So I don't think it is a very contradictory perspective, but I think if we also see the newly released Quad statement which has come, that actually complements India-Japan statement that it's a free and open Indo-Pacific. The new joint statement talks about free, open, inclusive, and resilient Indo-Pacific. So I don't think both are contradictory in nature. We need to see the political tone. We need to understand the political tone that the leadership try to bring from time to time, try to actualize and try to factor their foreign policy on the given day, on the given context. But they are definitely not contradictory to each other.
Thank you, Jagannath. But at the same time, you did mention that there was a kind of an apparent, perhaps slightly a perception of a lesser commitment under the new administration. And that was something I was hoping to ask Satoru-san, actually, do you see a change? Because we already mentioned the importance of leadership. We mentioned the importance of chemistry that there was between Modi and Abe. Do you see a change of policy or an impact on the Japan-India relations under the Suga administration? And related to that is also the question that Jagannath partially answered himself, that we see a change of language indeed from the free and open to peaceful and prosperous under the Suga administration. Do you see that somehow changing the status quo, or where do you think that things may be going on the Japanese side? And because we're running out of time, I will let you actually pick any of the other questions if you want to say something about Taiwan or ASEAN or the trilateral cooperation. It is up to you, but primarily the possibility of changing direction under the Suga administration.
Okay. Thank you very much. Yeah, this is important question. Strategically, there is no problem. Course is same between the Prime Minister Shinzo Abe and Prime Minister Suga, Yoshihide Suga. And there is no big problem between Japan and India, so it will progress. That is promised. But that is strategically. But tactically, there are plenty of problems, and especially 2 examples indicates there is a big tactical problem. First one is when Japan suggests RCEP and try to persuade India to join the RCEP. RCEP's economic framework. In October, Japanese say, finally, India opposed to join this RCEP, rejected. And that time, I realized Japanese do not know what happened in the India-China border area. Brave Indian soldier, 20 Indian soldiers sacrificed their lives and 75 injured, and nearly 10 months, the Indian troops and Chinese troops continue to face off in the border area, and China continue to stay in the Indian side. So that timing, Japan tried to persuade India. But that timing, Indian Prime Minister Modi tried to decouple with China as a card to make pressure toward China. That timing, Japan suggests RCEP. RCEP is coupling and manage China's influence. So during the India continued decoupling policy, that timing, Japan tried to suggest coupling. So this is bad timing. Why such kind of situation has happened? And the second example is Quad Summit. Many Japanese media say, because India refused to mention about China, joint statement cannot clearly mention about China in the Quad Summit in the March this month. That's not true indeed, because if the Quad expect India, say China this month, it is one kind of miracle, I believe, because the last month, Chinese troops withdrew from the border area, not all, but some certain important point. So more than 10 months, India need to maintain the face-off situation. Tension is very high. After that, this tension has eased. Just last month. Despite this month, Japan demand India to say China, and start to rise the tension between India and China. India cannot reply this such kind of offer. So Japanese should understand this situation. So why such kind of situation has happened? 2 bad timing, tactical bad timing has happened. Because in Japan's bureaucratic system, there is no responsible official to collect the information of the security situation of India and ask Prime Minister Suga to reply this situation or understand this situation. That kind of the bureaucratic problem exists, I believe. So that is the reason when I met the officials, I raised this issue. Such kind of the tactical mistake will influence the strategic benefit Japan can get. So strategically, there is no problem, but tactically, Japan must improve the situation. Without this, Prime Minister Suga, who is not interested in India, he is a quite domestic prime minister, so his working style is very good. He knows how to work, but he lacks the knowledge about India. In this case, bureaucrat organization must support Prime Minister Suga. And in this case, there is no such kind of system in Japan currently. We must improve. That is my opinion about Suga's policy toward India.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Satoru-san, and thank you both for joining us today. Unfortunately, I wish we had more time. We should schedule these lectures for at least 2 hours. This was absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing your views. To our audience, do not desperate. Yes, it is the end of our March lecture series, but we will be back in May with our third module, looking at Japan as a global security actor. So we will zoom out a little bit more and go closer into Japan's engagement with Europe, with NATO, within international organizations. And so stay tuned for more exciting public lectures of the Japan program. Of course, you can rewatch this lecture in its entirety on our YouTube channel and subscribe. You can follow more of our activities on Twitter, on our website. With that, I wish you all the best. Good evening to Tokyo, good afternoon to New Delhi, and have a great day here in Europe. Stay well, stay healthy, and goodbye. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.